Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the May 23rd installment of the Iamblichus reading group. We're finally back together tonight, and we're going to go ahead and start with a few comments that I have, and then we'll open up the discussion for everyone else. So tonight we're going to be talking about the notion of telestic rituals. We've read a lot in Iamblichus about the rites that inure participants to pain and throw them into altered states of consciousness where they don't know who they are and experience dissociative episodes. In the last few sessions, we've been putting Iamblichus's ideas into the framework of Plato's theory of four manias, or raptures, as some scholars prefer to call them. We've already talked about erotic and prophetic rapture, and we've also kind of discussed telestic rapture, though we didn't call it that at the time. Tonight I'd like to focus more on telestic rapture. There are several reasons to do this. We gain a clearer understanding of the culture surrounding the practices that Iamblichus talks about. This shows that Iamblichus's descriptions are not as far out as they might at first seem to us, and perhaps they show us how strange ancient Greek culture could sometimes be. Another reason to look at telestic rites is to see the function they performed in Iamblichus's society at that time. In the secondary reading that I shared with you, we read that Greek's telestic rites had a therapeutic side to them, whether within the mystery rites or the more open Bacchic and Corbiantic rites. We find this therapeutic aspect. Third, we might be able to start seeing whether Iamblichus's ideas are relevant to our time, or are they simply too tied to their historical context, such that we can't salvage much for ourselves. And then fourth, if we can salvage something from Iamblichus's thought, this might begin to shed light on whether theurgy, in and of itself, has any meaning for modern life, and what that meaning might be. The book I shared by Yulia Ustinova covers all the types of rapture we've discussed in the last few sessions. Her thesis is that the experiences of rapture were social and personal integrative practices, which involved altered states of consciousness occurring within socially recognized practices and rituals. Once lived through, the raptured person can then return to their normal, everyday selves. Let's start with the word telestic. It comes from the Greek word telestikos, meaning of or relating to initiation or mystery rites, of inspiration, wisdom, mystical. And in relation to a person's life, it means involved with mystery rites. Ustinova talks about the mystery rites as the paradigmatic telestic rite. These are those rites that are so famous and about which we know so little, since the restrictions around them included social and civic penalties for discussing them outside the time of the rites themselves. The most famous rites were to Demeter and Persephone, which were mostly centered on fertility. According to Ustinova, the mystery rites included secret knowledge that was passed to participants. An origin story of some type was told or exacted, and then the initiates had a visionary experience, perhaps involving some form of hallucinogenic. So among the 5 stages, again, to reiterate and give their Greek names, we have purification, which is a ritual cleansing to make oneself worthy of participation in the rite. We had paradosis, teaching of the myth, which was at the center of the ritual, and then came apopteia, or paranoia, which is the final visionary experience. About this last point of apopteia and paranoia, the Christian writer Clement of Alexandria writes that these rites ended with the, quote, non-rational, holistic contemplation and comprehension that occurs at the consummation of the mystery rites. contemplate or epoptoiein, and comprehend or paranoiein themselves and the universe. Ustinova quotes Plutarch, the philosopher Plutarch, about the very powerful experience of epopteia. The knowledge of what is knowable, pure and simple, that illuminates the soul like a thunderbolt, and for this only time allows it to touch and see. For which reason, Plato and Aristotle termed this part of philosophy apoptic, because they pass by ostensible, heterogeneous, and manifold notions, and leap up towards the primal, the simple, and the immaterial. And when they really touch the pure truth concerning these matters, they think that, just as in mystery initiations, or telete, they reach the end, or telos, of philosophy. The otherworldly experience of secret knowledge had a binding effect, socially and no doubt personally. With such an experience, one could have an experience of blessedness, of being loved by the gods, and living with them. It is, as Ustinova writes, the highest point of this trajectory to immortality. It is neither reason nor knowledge, but rather seeing the pure essence of a phenomenon, divine revelation, corresponding to the mystic epopteia. So for Ustinova, mystery rites were about a grand vision that the participant has, which makes the givers a sense of wonder and awe, and as being integrated into a larger and grand plan of life. Now let's go back to Socrates and Plato when they talk about the Telestic rites. Let's remember what Socrates says about them. I think we can gather some valuable information about further reasons for why the rites were performed and what they helped accomplish for individuals. In discussing Telestic Rapture, Plato has Socrates say, "When diseases and the greatest troubles have been visited upon certain families through some ancient guilt, madness or rapture has entered in, and by prophecy found a way of release for those in need, taking refuge in prayers and in the service of the gods, and so by purifications or katharmoi and sacred rites, teletai, brought him who has this madness or rapture to safety for the present and future time, and found for him who is rightly orthos, mad, a release from present evils." Note here that Socrates talks about illnesses, even sickness that originates in some form of family guilt. These would be sins of the fathers passed down to the sons and daughters, resulting in various maladies, including insanity. This is where Ustinova sees the entry of mental illness and related disease in the picture. He provides numerous examples from Greek history and literature where instances of insanity take place. In her estimation, the Telestic Rapture is a means of overcoming insanity itself. That is, by being possessed by the gods, an insane person who is suffering from psychological issues can be cured of their insanity. This might seem like an odd thing to say. Was insanity or psychological problems an issue in ancient Greek societies? Perhaps we should not be surprised. Just look around this world. In the U.S., the National Institutes of Health reports that 57.8 million adults live with some form of mental illness. That's a sixth of the American population. 1 in 6 to 1 in 5 takes some form of drug for mental illness. Worldwide, anxiety affects 284 million people in the world. Depression affects 264 million people. Alcohol use disorder affects 107 million people, and drug use disorder affects 71 million people. When the Hermetic writings and Iamblichus's works were finally translated in Renaissance Italy by Marsilio Ficino, he immediately set about applying them to health and medicine, along with a revitalized Christian theology. Ficino, Agrippa, Bruno all assumed that these works could help cure the various ailments of humans. Ficino used the writings to identify how music affected the sick soul and developed recipes for curative amulets. Agrippa went further and explored the role that ceremonial magic could play in healing souls. Bruno as well explored the psychological impacts of magic in Hermetic philosophy. And of course, if we return to Iamblichus, we find him as well extolling the wonderful health and spiritual benefits of theurgy. Quote, the advent of the gods gives to us health of body, virtue of soul, purity of intellect, the elevation of everything within us to their proper principles. It removes the cold element and destructive element in us, while it increases the vital heat and renders it more powerful and dominant. And it makes all things commensurate with soul and intellect, makes our light shine with intelligible harmony, and shows what is not body as no body to the eyes of the soul by means of those of the body. What can we make of Iamblichus and the Telestic rites? Can we perhaps undergo them to be healed or to heal? And further, how is theurgy related to these practices of social integration and personal healing? Anyone have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you were describing the stats, I was thinking, my God, most people on the planet today have some kind of, illness or disorder or depression or anxiety. And, modern medicine doesn't seem to be able to get to the root of these problems. So I think that this is probably the way. I think these are the ways that have always been there to heal the soul. And it's interesting when they talk about the different types, because it seems to be tailored to different people and different needs. There was one part that I read about where Plato distinguishes the four inspirations. He says the musical, which inspires the soul to express itself in song and poetry. The telestic, under the influence of which the soul is inspired to perfect itself and take the necessary steps which will free it from the evils and diseases resulting from sin. The prophetic, which inspires the soul to interpret the future so that men may direct their lives rightly. And last and the highest, the inspiration of love, which arises in the soul as a result of the contemplation of beauty. And I think, there was more than four, wasn't it, when you were doing the description? Did you say there were six?
There were four.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there were four.
So those are the four that Plato talks about, yeah?
Yeah. So then, like, when I kind of look at this, I see, which one resonates with me the most. And the telestic does tend to resonate with me the most. Like under the influence which the soul is inspired to perfect itself. So I'd put that in with the purification aspect of it, and the inspiration part of the mechanism behind that which is needed to, it says sin, but I guess everyone sins, if we if we put it like that.
Well,
but the reason that
their notion of sin, well, it's a Greek notion of sin, not necessarily Abrahamic notion of sin, but I'm sorry.
Okay. So what is the difference?
Well, it could be, sin could be anything where you touch, something which was forbidden. Sin could be passed down from generation to generation, although certainly that's in the Jewish Testament.
Yeah, but when you said the difference between the Greek version of sin and the Abrahamic, what is the difference?
When we talk about, when many people hear about sin, they think of original sin. They
Oh,
also,
okay.
it also talks about, depending upon um, whether you're talking, there's a lot of talk about sexual sin in the Jewish Testament as well. That
Right.
might not apply so much to the Greek notion of sin.
Right, right. I see what you mean. Okay. Yeah,
It's
so I
certainly
mean,
not a sense of original sin. At least it
yeah,
seems, that there was no
which
original
is
sin by any of our, for example, Adam and Eve in the
right.
Jewish and Christian
Yeah,
texts.
I see what you mean. Right, right, right. So, I mean, it tends to be the one that, like the Telestic one, it does really seem to be, I guess the Iamblichus talks about it because it really does. It probably is the mechanism or the science, if you like, of the knowledge of how to purify the soul. And this seems to be the one that I resonate with the most. Like
But what if we,
musical.
yeah,
Sorry.
I'm just wondering, what if we thought of sin in terms of something like, genetics?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of put it down to DNA.
Yeah.
Like when they talk about things passing down, like when we're at the doctors, they'll ask, about a history of breast cancer and things like that. What does it come down to? It comes down to DNA and what
Mm-hmm.
kind of passes down in your DNA. So that's kind of how I see it now.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason that this particular one resonates with me the most is because the idea of freeing the soul and perfecting it is the purification process in itself, which I feel was the underlying basis of pretty much all of the mystical teachings, is to really to free the soul to get to the higher planes and to be possessed by the divine, I guess. So that's, I
Possessed
guess,
in
why.
unification, perhaps, with the one,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so
the
that's
divine.
why I think. Yes, so that's why the Telestic one really kind of
And
resonates, and it makes.
in order to do that, we need to find some harmony, either with ourselves, with the universe, with society in some way, so that we can overcome them.
Yes, and it is, and it tends to be a process of transforming or transmuting unconsciousness into consciousness, and that's really the growth of our own consciousness, which I would say is the growth of our own self realization,
What
or
do
the
you mean
growth
by
of our
that?
own.
What? Why?
What I mean,
What do you mean? What do you mean by the unconscious, and how does that come into play?
I don't talk about it in the unconscious as in the like the modern sense. What I
Yeah.
mean by unconsciousness is the energy of unawareness.
Mm.
And to become more aware, we need the light of consciousness in order to transform the unawareness into the whole. And that's really been, the kind of direction that I've always been interested in.
So
And
it's
and,
kind
and
of
I guess,
ignorance and
yeah,
knowledge.
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. And like the energy of forgetting, because I think that if we have that divinity or that part of the light within us, then why are we not aware of it? Why do we not see it? Or why don't we always experience it? And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
because we go into that energy or that place of forgetting of the ignorance and unawareness. And the process, I guess the telestic influence is what helps us to purify that or transform it. And therefore it transforms into the one. And the more that
Well,
you do that, I think you become one with the one eventually.
yeah,
So
I
that's
think
how I
there's
feel.
interest. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think there are several different things we could talk about, right? Why does the soul get lost, right? What,
Yeah.
I mean, here we're talking about illness. So, is the soul ill when it gets lost, or is illness another thing on top of getting lost? We could talk about, for example, I would think, ignorance, just outright spiritual ignorance, and not have to talk about any type of illness unless we look at that ignorance itself as an illness.
Yes, yes. And I think this telestic idea is to really get knowledge of how to change that. I think all of these help. I mean, why do they help to inspire and heal the soul? Because I think the same process is happening. Something is changing within us to heal us. So whether it's the musical, which inspires the soul and brings healing to the soul with poetry, the telestic, which teaches us how to perfect the soul, the prophetic, which inspires us so that we may know which direction to take and how to foresee things for our own journey, or the highest, which is the inspiration of love, which is beauty. I mean, I think all of them are different facets of our being. And I think we need all of them. And I think we're inclined to all of them, are we not? I think we're
Mm-hmm.
naturally inclined to rhythm and harmonious sounds
Right.
and vibrations. I think
But
we're
are we sick?
naturally
I
inclined.
mean, are we sick though? Is
I mean,
ignorance
I
equatable with
think,
sickness? Why does my
I think
soul,
so. I
you
think
know,
so.
why have
I
I
think when,
forgotten about this? What makes me
yeah,
somehow go away from the unification with the one?
yes, yeah, I would say it is a form of sickness to forget that and, to go astray or to be like this idea of being separated from it. It would be sickness on various levels. And when that sickness, I guess, gets to the body, it can manifest in different ways. But what is real sickness? Real sickness is the overcasting of the radiance. That's what I think. And how many people are truly, really radiant, like beaming with light? So I'd say
Mhm.
that sickness happens on various levels. And unless we're all radiating with bright light, I'd say the ignorance is sickness. It's a form of darkness. Yeah.
But when we're getting rid of the darkness, how do we purify ourselves, right? What is the purification? Do we have practices? We don't have practices, right? In modern society, we rely
Yeah.
on drugs. You know, those
Mhm.
statistics I think, are wildly worldwide. I mean, I think they're more precise for the U.S., but worldwide, I think those statistics are wildly inaccurate because
Yeah.
I mean, what are the methodologies that they're using to actually
That's
bring
right.
the
That's why.
identify those
Yeah.
statistics? So they could be
That's right.
much, it could be 1 billion people. More
Mm,
people are in one way or another have a certain mental illness. But here we're talking about something which afflicts everyone, not just those
yeah.
who've got like either a biological mental illness or some type of
Yeah.
socially induced illness of psychological illness,
Yeah.
right?
But is that not why we're all here? Right? We're all in the human body because it affects all of us. Like
Well, I
I
think
kind of.
Iamblichus is saying that we are because we've fallen,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
We've
Yeah.
descended into matters, and matter is evil by nature. So
Yeah.
because we're material, we are influenced by all of the materiality that we have just in order to survive in this world, right? We have to use this material body to do everything, right? The whole sensory apparatus that we have to
Mhm.
use somehow, that it, it's required, it's necessary to survive, but at the same time it somehow draws us away from
Mm,
the being able to see, which are the light or the oneness that we're supposed to remember in order to become healed.
yes. Yeah. I see that when he talks about it. Yeah, I absolutely see that. But that's why I say, like modern medicine doesn't seem mm, to address it from this aspect. And that's why I do find the telestic influence probably one of the most important. because it really does give you the way of perfecting the soul and taking the necessary steps which will eventually free it. But I think a combination of all of them is, I think, what we're naturally inclined to. We're naturally inclined to the harmony. We're naturally inclined to the purification process. I think we're naturally inclined to foreseeing our own way and guidance. And I think we are naturally inclined to beauty. You know, I think they are all innate within us. And I think that all of these are different facets. And I think they're all necessary. I think they're all needed.
Now, this is where I think that you and I would disagree, because I don't think we're naturally inclined to
I mean,
any type of.
innately, I don't mean that, everyone does them. I mean,
Mhm,
innately, like if you, for example, if you watch a child, they'll be naturally wanting to dance. They'll be
mhm.
naturally inclined to joy. They'll be naturally interested in like things that the way the direction their life is going. The things will naturally start to come out, and they are naturally inclined to love and beauty. And that's what I mean. I mean, innately. I don't mean that we all do it,
Mhm.
but I do think it's there.
We
So
can
you
tap
don't
into
think,
it. You think that we can that, well, I mean, obviously,
yeah,
I agree that we can tap into something, so it has to
yeah,
be there for us to be able to tap into.
yeah,
But
that's what I
for
mean. Yeah.
naturally, isn't, I'm just wondering whether the natural inclination of being in a body is to go away from unity and knowledge
I,
and into
I
more
mean,
and more
I mean,
ignorance.
it absolutely takes us away because of the distractions. But the ones that, I don't know, I guess the ones that care, the people that care about all of this, it is because it's there. That's why we'll naturally be drawn to it. And I do think that if there is divinity in all of us, then we will naturally be inclined to these things. I'm not saying that it doesn't get covered, because I do think it gets covered. I think it gets dampened, and I think it becomes harder, the more we come away from it. But I think it's there.
I think this is why the notion of original sin is appealing to some, is that it is so difficult to see in the world where, as we live in it, to see that there's any type of natural inclination for good, given all of the evil
Yeah,
that we do see in the world.
yeah,
We're
yeah.
saying,
I
well,
mean, it's hard.
people were born in sin and they continue in sin.
I know it's hard, and I think that's why this life is hard, and I think that that's why this life is difficult. But if it is true, or if we do really believe that there is this divine spark or this divine light within our core, then that means that we must be innately good. Now, I'm not saying that that's not covered. I'm not saying that, we come so far from that we get led completely astray. Of course, that happens. But I still believe it's there, because I do believe that we all have this divine spark, or it's there. Like,
Mhm.
innately, we are all good. Even that seed deep inside is there. And that's what I do think. I do believe that to be true.
And you're thinking that the way of purification is, as that you are now involved in, is capable of bringing you back, or bringing people back to their true selves. Is that right?
I do think that, yes. I
And
actually believe
obviously,
that's the only way.
mhm.
Like, I don't believe you can dance yourself towards it, right?
Well, why
I
not?
don't believe.
Isadora
uh,
Duncan did. Why not?
I mean, I mean, could that dance be from the ego,
And don't the
right?
Sufis do that? The mystic Sufis?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. But does that in itself purely and solely take you back? completely.
I think they
Without the
think it does.
purification, without the purification process, without, the steps and, all of that. I'm not saying that there isn't mania or ecstasy in that moment, but I think to become one with the one is a much more difficult process. Maybe not for everyone. I mean, I guess it depends on karma too, right? Like your DNA and genes and all of that. I mean,
Oh,
if you're lucky, then yeah, maybe you could dance your way to it. I mean, I don't see it
sure.
like that. So
I mean,
yeah,
it is. So you talk about DNA, you talk about and so on with genetics. That is still the body which would be restricting us from attaining any type of enlightenment or any type
mm,
of um, unification with the one.
yeah, yeah,
And so, if we're going to restrict ourselves to a purely physiological or biological understanding of human nature, then yeah, there is no hell, right? We have
mm,
to, we have to find a way, or at least we have to say that there is something that exists outside of just the body and genes and DNA, et cetera, et cetera. And
yeah.
is that a statement of belief, or is that a
I
statement of experience? I mean, do we
I think
have? I think we do have some instances. Personally, I do. In my own life, I would say that genetically, I'm predisposed to certain things, and I have felt what I would consider to be for lack of a better term, and it's not very exact, supernatural type
yeah,
of um, interruption of my life to turn it another way. And I think we have lots of cases where people have
hmm,
these types of religious um, revelation and turn their lives around.
yes.
Is that what we have to talk about in order to kind of begin to say that this type of healing is possible?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think that a combination of things is necessary because, like the ritual practice and stuff. I don't think is separate from other parts. Like what I was saying about the dancing. I don't think that the dancing is enough because the Sufis do the dervish, the spinning practice, but
Right.
they also have to do the prayer. They also have to
Mhm.
do the rituals. They also have to do, lots of the other things. So it's not just a matter of one thing. A combination of them, I think, is what will get us anywhere. And that's why I think that there's more than one facet to it.
So the notion where this Ustanova, the woman who was writing about the Telestic mania in the
Yeah.
secondary source, she's talking about how it fits into a culture, how it fits into social practices. Those are those are important for this type of healing to take place. It has to be what you're saying. You're agreeing with this author and saying
Yeah,
those
but
things have to
that
be in place.
yeah, and that's where I'm thinking that this innate inclination comes from. Because, within like modern society, if we are inclined to the music or the rhythm or the dance, where is that coming from? Is coming from that innate uh, knowing. And if we have an inclination towards beauty, where is that coming from? That innate within our souls. And where is this inclination of ritual or purification and wanting to do things like that? Where is it coming from? So in modern day society, I think that's where we have all of these practices and, you know, rituals and dance and hallucinogens and all of that kind of thing.
Oh, so
I think,
see, You're kind of
I think
going
it,
where I thought while I was reading this about the Bacchic rituals and the Corbiantic rituals,
yeah,
where, I mean, is like the modern equivalent of going through a mystery rite, going to a rock concert and taking huge amounts of drugs and having a religious revelation. Is that
yeah,
the
yeah,
modern
yeah.
equivalent? I mean,
Maybe.
certainly I could I mean,
I mean, I
and
don't
then,
know, but it may well be. Yeah. I mean,
I
it
mean, I've
certainly looks
experienced
like.
that and it was interesting, but I
Yeah, I
would say that it was not lasting.
mean, yeah, that's right. It's more fleeting, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I do think that that's where it's coming from, right? That drives
Mhm.
you to something like that. But then when you do recognize the fleeting nature of it, I think naturally what tends to happen is that it takes you down a path where you want the constancy. You want to see it constant. You don't want the fleeting nature anymore. You don't
Right.
want the hallucinogen and for it to be, that experience and that's it. You want something that's longer lasting. And I think that's what, if you continue, you do find the answers.
And we do that in modern secular society, though, or do we have to revert
I mean,
to?
I
And this
think
is
that
this isn't meant as a bad in a bad way, like revert. But do we have to
yeah,
take on, certain like more
I
traditional
think so.
style religious practices?
I believe so. Yeah,
I'm
I
a I'm
believe
a I'm approaching my stop. I've been leaving running commentary in the chat so that I can remember what I
Oh,
was
okay.
thinking.
I was wondering what
No,
that
no
was,
worries.
what those beeps were about.
No one. It's actually funny. The chat really kind of. I guess maybe I followed the chat well. Like we seem to go along this thing, and we're at a point now where I can say the first thing I said and the last thing I said at the same time because we're approaching the same territory, which is nice. Sorry if you can hear the train noise behind me. I'm almost at my stop, so I can annoy the people around me for a little bit.
That's all right.
So at the very beginning, I was talking about the how the in the primary sources in Iamblichus and stuff that we were talking about, he was often talking about people who were in secret societies and initiated to mystery schools and things. And they had very different goals than normal people. And in the secondary source, we talked more about normal people. And those two groups use these tools very differently. So that normal people would use them to recover a normal life out of mental illness or something. They would use it to wake up, to snap themselves out of their afflictions, so that they could go back to life, to society, life and society, and working in a job and being with their families. But the people who were initiates were thinking about these same things differently, using them for religious and spiritual ends, and for something that they would consider to be more of a divine ascent or something like that. I think that we can think about those same things today, actually, in a lot of the ways that we still seek transcendence, like going to rock concerts or tripping, or going to a big sports game and yelling along with everybody until you feel like you're all one, giant yelling being. Like, you know, you can still approach it in the same way that, like, sometimes people are using it for recovery and for enhancing their everyday life, and other people are using it for other goals. And who is doing it determines how they use it. Sorry, was any of that audible over the train?
Yeah, no,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. I could hear you. I, I
Yeah.
think, I think,
Um,
yeah. I mean, I do see what you're saying. I mean, I think the only problem, if, like within my own experience, is when I've gone and done like these other things for that kind of short-term ecstasy and that kind of that moment of bliss. They were just so fleeting that I'd go, and it's almost as if you'd want to go more for like another hit, but it never fulfilled the deeper constant. And that's what kind of directed me to search in another direction where it would be longer lasting, where it would be more permanent, where it would be imbued with my being. And I think that there is that difference.
In the long run,
between,
absolutely, yes. In the
yeah,
long term,
like
yes.
that.
But I think that there's also value in fleeting experiences for people who've never had them. That it can show them
Yeah,
another thing is possible, and it can literally initiate to like begin them to search for what that is from that point
yeah,
forward. And so it
absolutely.
can be an
And
introduction.
why I say, yeah, this is why I say it's innate, because when we're naturally inclined to search for these things, why are we doing it? We want to hide. We want to feel good. We want to feel God, basically, right? That's why we're inclined to it. And sometimes it can lead us astray. Sometimes it can take us further away. But I think that we search it, or we go and we look for it because of the innate inclination. I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah, or
And
I don't know about
necessary.
innate. At least it's possible. At least it's possible because I think this is another thing I wrote in the chat. I think even Iamblichus, right, who can be sometimes a bit like, because he's a Platonist and many of the Platonists are pessimistic about the world, he can sometimes be a bit pessimistic about the world. But I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that
yeah.
even that though, even from within that, he still talks about how higher beings are trying to help us, and why do they want to help us? It's because they recognize us, because we're all part of the same family. I think that I think there's a way that he even says that.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think that this division sort of between, like, you can take the same tools and sometimes you can use them to sort of rejoin society, and sometimes you can use them to sort of uh, kind of, I don't want to say transcend, but kind of transcend society, or see through your societal role into a bigger vision. I think it's an interesting thing, an interesting
Well,
sort of dual function there.
yeah, I think I've done enough reading in sociology of religion and so on, and to understand the efficacy and the functionality of these types of ritual events. Even though they have this secular aspect to them, they still do follow certain patterns that we find in more unsecular events, such as religious practices. But I'm wondering whether there's not the type of differentiation that we should make, and the reason why Iamblichus perhaps one talks about the herd and talks about the people who somehow are resistant, perhaps by nature, perhaps who knows, resistant to enlightenment, resistant to maybe even health. They'd rather wallow in their despair, or they'd rather wallow in their illness for one reason or another, just because they can't bring themselves out. And so the practices that we talk about are occult. There's a reason for the secrecy, because if they do get out to the common person, or the person who has no interest at all above getting high, going and getting drunk at a football game and becoming one, as you were saying, Matt, with the great beast of football. That's their only interest. It's what Kierkegaard would talk about as far as the aesthetic experience of modern life and modern secular society. We're looking for continual gratification, sensual gratification, and it takes one, obviously, in many forms. And what secular society, modern secular society, does is make those forms more and more. We find that's what modern capitalism does. It provides us more and many more forms of instant gratification than we ever had, or humans ever had in the past. And it just keeps propagating them, and making them more and more. So we become more and more distant from. Again, if this is true, we become more and more distant from a true self, if such a concept entity, whatever you want to call it, exists.
Sure. And what's one of the big money makers, though? What's one of the big money makers right now of the transcendent experience of a psychedelic experience? One of the big ways that this is being exploited inside of capitalism is through psychedelic assisted therapy. It is about healing the person so that they can be a good participant in this society. And
Right.
that is a very different aim, I think, than people who are who are maybe seeking out having a spiritual experience, but they're not seeking it for the purposes of participating in that society, keeping it going in the same way that that you might do for in the way that some people would criticize psychotherapy as doing. I think that is that distinction to me. I when I said religious, I don't necessarily mean you're going to church on Sunday. I'm talking about when the reason that I'm bringing as the paradigm is the mystery school is not only because it's the touchstone for Iamblichus, but also because it's a mystery. You're an initiate. You have to be shown how to do this, and it's not obvious. It's hidden. It's occult. Yeah. And I know it sounds elitist to say this, to be like,
It
no,
is,
well,
yes.
most people don't get it. You have to be part of the secret initiated society of like people who get it. And it's such a counterintuitive secret that only the people who've been shown the way. But in some ways, I mean, I think that's been the model, and I think there's a reason for it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I had a reaction. Sorry, I had a reaction to that as well. I'm like pretty, at least in the past, have been really stridently democratic, to where nothing should be hidden from anybody. It should all be out there. Everybody's equal and all of those types of things. But as I've grown older, it does seem like people are resistant for one reason or another to understanding these higher principles of their lives. They don't want to change themselves. I've changed incredibly over 60 years or so, and made those types of changes that were required for me to at least come into at least a modicum of self-awareness. And I mean, it does seem that there are, and it's not just social. I don't think. I think people, do have a resistance to this because of giving into the pleasure and the satisfaction and so on. When Iamblichus, for example, talks about the herd and talks about the necessity for some type of occult secrecy, I immediately thought, well, over time I began to think of Kierkegaard and how he talks about the herd as well, the herd mentality, which was at the center of his time, at the center of this growing stream of fascistic tendencies within European society, which is to become one with the greater whole, to join the mob, to join the herd, and lose your sense of true self in the sense of this other bigger self, even though had nothing to do at all with any type of grandeur or grand illumination from another type of reality. It was all grounded in this reality.
Yeah, and this was picked up later by people like Julius Evola, who explicitly made that connection and said, nope, it's the same thing. When you become one with your, daddy dictator, that's God to you, which is terrible.
That's interesting. You talk about him. I'm sorry, first, Shana, go ahead.
No, finish what you're saying.
Well, I was just going to say how coincident, because I was just looking at Evola today, the book that he has on magic rituals. But anyway.
Oh, right. Yeah. And this is why I say that, even though these societal places and structures and constructs exist, if they are fleeting, then you're not getting what it is that ultimately your soul is after. Your soul is after being one with the one. And I think that's everybody. That's why I say it's innate. I don't think that any human being is on earth because of any other reason. That's just what I think. Now, does that mean that there aren't people that won't see it ever? Yeah, but that's them. But I do believe that that's why we're here. We're here to do this, or at least try. And that's why I say if it's fleeting, then you're kind of missing the mark. And I'm not saying that it wasn't needed. Maybe that concert was needed, or that the drugs was needed, or the alcohol was needed. But if it's fleeting, it's not going to get you there. You know,
Right.
I'm sorry, if someone is an alcoholic, it's not going to get them there. It will just give you those fleeting moments of feeling better in those moments. And that's
See, I
why
think.
to get
Hmm.
to get the constant, there has to be a process, and that's different. And I think that, you know, if whoever it is, we can continue on that inclination, or that kind of calling, or that guidance, or whatever it is, it will take us to the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing, until we start to find something that is more constant.
I'm beginning to see this in the context of a much bigger view, horizon. Right now, we're talking about where the horizon is a single life. You know, a single 60, 70, 80 years, whatever it is, of a human life. I'm starting to think in terms of a larger perspective of lives. Each human has multiple lives, and their souls, you know, after this life, will then transfer and be reborn into another body, into another
Yeah,
life.
I
And
said I'm
over
not doing
and,
it this time.
and
I said
over
this is
time,
my last one.
but you see, if we take that perspective, then I think what you say can be true, which is that someone who's already lived a life and all that they've ever accomplished is to have gone to a rock concert and tripped a few times and had, you know, some type of small revelation. And that's it. That's all that they've done. The next life, then perhaps that will provide the next step, or a further step in that journey to the one and to the transcendent. Hello?
And maybe not even as a human. I mean, it sounds like that's a lot of the talk of gods and heroes at the beginning of the book, was that
Mm-hmm.
these are sometimes beings who have gotten there, but sometimes beings who have gotten past there and have chosen to go back to that level to bring people back, or bring other beings back.
Right,
And
right.
I
Right.
think that's very,
So
very
this
long
time
view.
round, so this time round, they've just said, "Look, I've done it. I'm just here to have fun now."
No,
You know,
no,
that's,
no,
that's it.
two
That's what
different
I'm doing.
scenarios.
This is my time to
Yeah,
do that. I mean, you know, that's the thing. It could be. I don't know. That's why, you know, we can never judge where somebody else. It's really a very, very personal thing. But yeah, it could be. They're like, "Oh, I'm in heaven now.
the
This is my
Grateful
time."
Dead. I sure hope they are. I've been busting my ass for them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, that's
Funny.
an interesting comment that you say, and I'm sure it's true about that we can't judge someone and where they
Yeah,
are
yeah,
on their spiritual path.
yeah, yeah,
You know, Jesus does talk about you will know them by their fruits, and
yeah,
if they're if their fruits are, let's just, if their fruits are the most heinous kind, the most despicable evil types of product, then I think I can make a judgment on that person. And I can say, well, you know, they're not very far along, are they, on their path?
yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
but I think,
they've still got a long way to go.
yeah, I mean, I think that that only really comes to play though on a personal level. Like if I have to interact or spend time with this person, and then I will have to make that discrimination for myself. You know, okay, let's just say business. do I take this as a business partner, then I'm going to have to make that discrimination. It's going to be important for me, especially, in the kind of line of work that I do, that this person is far along, because that's what's important for me. Outside of that, it's not really my place to say.
I think, yeah, I mean, how many
Or,
of us on our personal lives really meet evil people, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've met killers. I've met people who, at least they've said that they've killed people, plus my
Mm.
wife's cousin was in prison for
Hmm.
murder. But, and he's a really nice guy. He's actually really nice to get along with and everything and that kind of thing. But there are people, maybe not I haven't met that I can recall right away. Someone who has done something so despicable that I would just consider them lost, a lost
Yeah,
soul.
yeah, yeah.
But certainly on the level of international or
Yeah, all the
socialist,
politicians.
I can take exactly. I mean,
Yeah,
like this
exactly.
guy who just died in Iran. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
he murdered hundreds and thousands of women
Yeah, I
and
heard that they
had
were
them.
celebrating. I don't know,
Yeah,
but yeah.
I celebrated. Put him right on the
Mm,
front page of my blog. Burn in
mm.
hell.
Well, this is
But
the thing. I mean, but again, is that like when I kind of analyze that side of things, I kind of think, well, I see them on TV. I've not met them in real life. Are they in my little world? My little world? Actually, they're not. So I can discriminate because I see it, but how much is that going to influence my personal life? Okay, not much. Let me just focus. Because, I
as a
think that's,
social being, though, as personally, but as a social being, we are social animals,
yeah, of course.
political animals,
And
and so on.
this is what destroys society. But then, I kind of have to refocus and say, well, what does that mean for me? You know, what part do I have to play? Because
Mhm.
I don't know them. I can't speak to them. I can't advise them. I can't say, you know what, this is
Well,
nonsense, Because if I was in that position, then I would be able to say X, Y, and Z. But
well,
for me, it's like I make that judgment and I do make that discrimination because it's obvious to me. But then I always have to bring it back to me. I kind of say, let me refocus because it's distracting. It really can take me. I get angry. I get really, really angry. But what does
mhm.
that do for me? It takes me away from my center. It does that more often than not. You know.
Yeah.
So
No, I
I agree.
understand. I really
I
do. I
agree
mean,
with you.
if it
I
distracts you
agree.
from your own personal development
Yeah,
and
I mean,
spiritual
there's a lot of
awareness,
anger, right? There's a lot of anger there. There's a
yeah.
lot of like, this is just, you know, what else can it do apart from make you angry? I don't know. But it just really throws me off too much. So that's why I always have to recenter and say, you know what? Of course, we live in the world. Of course, this is going to exist. The world is like this. But I don't want it to take me away. I have to keep coming back.
Well, I'm going to
But
fight it,
I agree with you though.
and
I do.
I'm going to put a thing on my blog that says "Burn in hell, jerk." And hopefully the people who read that will understand what I'm saying and begin to understand that there are certain things that we can allow in this world and certain things that we can't. And
Well, that's it.
the persecution of women and the treatment of women, the way that this guy and people like him committed, requires just remediation. It demands some type of just reaction. And so I'm going to take that as far as I can with it, and I will
Yeah.
act
And
socially and accordingly.
I do agree with that, but it's like, that's when I have to say, if what does it mean for me? So obviously what it meant for you was that you put it on your socials because that's your action. For me, the action is bring it back to me. If I was in that position, then yeah, I would. You know, if I was if I was above him, he would have been in jail. He would have probably been executed or whatever it is for. I think heinous crimes deserve justice. Of course I do, but I'm in none of those positions. So my anger just doesn't help me. That's what I'm saying.
I do believe in judicial, types of justice. So there is that.
Yes, so do I. Yeah.
Oh,
Bit off topic, but necessary.
no, yeah, I think so. I think it was, I know I've been thinking about it and wanted to get it, out there for
Yeah,
people to
yeah.
understand and hear about.
Mhm.
But I think also we have covered a really a lot of good territory tonight, and I think we've had a really good discussion, and I think that there's a lot more to take back, to continue to think about and to
Yeah, absolutely.
put into practice.
I think I would definitely look into it more because it's kind of nice to get more knowledge of these four manias because they are very interesting. So I will do a bit more research into them.
Appreciate it. Well, let's thank everyone for joining us tonight, and we'll go ahead and call it a session. And again, for everyone who listens, thank you for listening, and please leave your comments, and we will talk to you at least in this forum next time. Thank you.
Thank you.